Welcome everybody to the Land Records Meetup. Today's session is about hands-on parcel fabric, migrating and administrating parcels. Just a note, during the real meetup we forgot to press the record button, so we are now re-recording some of the portions that we missed on, and also some of the demos that I didn't do such a good job on. So this is a second chance, and we're going to kick it off. I'm going to be co-presenting now with Christine. The agenda today is mostly about data migration, which is migrate data from external sources, anything basically that is not a parcel fabric for ArcMap. And then there's the upgrade process from the ArcMap parcel fabric. We're going to cover those two workflows, and the target will be the same. A new parcel fabric in ArcGIS Pro will also show how you can take this data and deploy it on an enterprise environment, and common things you do after those processes in your map. So Christine was presenting this in the original presentation, but I'm going to try to do as good job as Christine did. So what is a parcel fabric in Pro? A parcel fabric is basically a controller data set. It controls other feature classes. Those feature classes, unlike ArcMap, are simple feature classes. Those are points, lines, polygons. The records feature class itself is a polygon class as well. The behavior of parcels can be managed and the quality maintained by using two engines. One is the topology engine that looks after the relationships between geometries, and the other one is a new framework called attribute rules that can do both attribute validation as well as attributes and geometry, because it has access to the Esri functionality. And when you validate those, you might generate error features, which as a result, as you can see here in the diagram, both points, connection lines, lines and polygons, everything is associated to the records. It has the information to know what record was associated when it was created, or even when retired. Another difference is that every parcel type has its own polygon and line feature classes. So if you have two parcel types in your parcel fabric, you will have two of those. Each one can have its own different schema and its own rules based on the behavior you seek to have. So you can create as many parcel types as you need. As you see here in the diagram, each one has its own polygon and line feature class. And the records are also, every time you perform a record-driven workflow, which is things like merge and split, new parcels are being created and older parent parcels are being retired and become historic. The record feature class ties to that parcel lineage. So every record knows which features it creates, and those are imprinted on every feature, but every parcel that gets retired also knows which record got it retired. And the record geometry, which is a polygon, is the footprint of that legal transaction that just occurred. And of course you have the quality rules that you can configure. So those are fully configurable through those two engines we mentioned, and you can add or remove the rules as you see fit to meet your business requirements. The parcel fabric feature classes, as we said, are simple. Here are some of those. We already talked about every parcel type has its own polygon and lines. Connection lines are a separate feature class, unlike ArcMap, and they maintain connectivity. They can have measurements, and they support processes like least square adjustment. They can also be modeled for other things like road center lines. Points, those are the glue of the parcel fabric. When a point moves, everything that is connected to that point moves with it. Error features are generated either from the topology engine or from the attribute rule engine. And as you can see here, there's also adjustment feature classes. Those adjustment feature classes, lines, points, and vectors, are generated if you run a least square adjustment. And in order to see a parcel fabric in a map, the best way is just to add the parcel fabric, the blue parcel fabric here, to an empty map or to existing one that does not have a parcel fabric. You can have one parcel fabric in a map, and that will bring in all the associated feature classes that are controlled by the parcel fabric with a good default symbology. And if you can see here in the catalog view, if you press on the context menu and press menu, it also shows you that you can add or remove partial types directly from here. It will launch the GP tool, and we'll see it soon. The parcel fabric you can think of as a system of record, and as such it also supports the record-driven system. Parcel features, as we said, are always associated to the record that created them, and you can see that that is done by populating basically the foreign key of the record feature class. So we use global IDs and not object IDs because those work better in a disconnected environment and through services and so on. And you can create a relationship between the parcels and the record that created them, and of course not see that GUID. That doesn't make much sense, but you can see how that's done. Every feature knows that it was created by a certain record, and if it gets retired and becomes historic, it will also get this populated to note which record got it retired. And you'll see that on polygons, on lines, connection lines, and points. It's all tracked back to the legal source, the legal record that created them. So a bit about measurements. If you are using a land records or cadastral system that uses measurements on lines, you can have those lines and store those measurements and dimensions in what we call COGO, things like direction, distance, radius, arc length, and can be stored and be true to the legal record they came from. If they didn't come from a legal record, we have a field called COGO type that can note if they came from, if they were entered manually, or if they were generated from the geometry, what we call inversed. And when a line gets split by half, we do proportion the COGO dimensions, and then you'll see that it got computed. So not only can you see those dimensions, you can also see where they came from for each boundary line. And if you don't have measurements on lines, it's perfectly okay to keep it empty and null. So it can be a boundary that was digitized between 2 points and has no measurements, for example, or something that is bounded to another feature class, like a natural feature. So you don't have to have COGO on everything. And if you're using, of course, coordinate-based cadastre, where the parcels are defined through coordinates on points, then in most cases you will not have dimensions on those lines. And every parcel type has its own set of lines, and that means that if there are different parcel types that stack each other, each one will have its own set of lines. And with this new boundary model in the parcel fabric, you can understand that you can have a parcel that has a bounds description where potentially it is using boundary lines that originated from different legal records, right? So it's bounded to something old, and for example, and then you'll have a parcel, a polygon defined by boundaries from different legal records. And of course, like in ArcMap, we want to have simple story here. There's 1 point on the ground, there's 1 point in the parcel fabric. We don't stack them. And if that point moves, it will move every parcel that's connected to that point. And those could be from multiple parcel types. And sometimes we call that the vertical alignment between parcels because they move together if a point moves. And that's what we want to see. Quality management. So the parcel fabric comes with built-in quality management tools. You can see a new tab that we introduced in 2.7 specifically to manage quality that allows for easy access to the error inspector and the fix tool, as well as dedicated tool to fix common problems that you might see, and to assess the quality of your spatial accuracy using least square adjustment. So that's all from part of the quality story. What is a good parcel? That's very subjective, and every organization will define different rules with for their purposes, even different rules between parcel types. So that's fully configurable. You can configure the rules that make sense for your organization, whether those are topology rules or attribute rules. The geometry can be handled by topology engine as well as attribute rules. And for attributes, of course, you have attribute rules. And those allow you to validate or evaluate and generate arrow features that you can zoom and display in multiple clients and assess the quality of your data and also address and fix them as you see certain issues. If you have data coming in, for example, from data submission, you can also assess the quality of that data that comes in before you push it to your default version and approve it. So this is a quick walkthrough for differences between ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro. If you're coming from ArcMap, that slide is relevant for you. If not, move on. So the parcel fabric in ArcGIS Pro has been simplified. If you remember, we squished all the parcel types in ArcMap 2.1 polygon class, and then we had to separate it out using definition queries and display certain fields only for certain types, etc. This was very complicated. In ArcGIS Pro, of course, each parcel type has its own polygon and line classes, with each one with its own schema. So it's an easy thing to bring it into a map. The plans table that had no geometry became now the records feature class. It's a polygon. It is the footprint of your legal transaction. And you can extend everything here, include the record as you see fit. Points, control points, and line points in ArcMap became points. Points can have accuracy. They can have or not coordinates. You can add additional fields as you see fit to meet the purposes of your business. And you can create multiple layers from one feature class if you really need to separate them and see them in different ways. That's not a problem in any GIS system. So that has been simplified greatly. Unlike line points, where we used to rely on foreign key and primary key to know which point sits on which line, now we just use spatial coincidence to determine that, and if a point moves, it will, or a line moves, things stay connected. Connection lines, as we said, are anything that doesn't form a boundary. Whether you wanted to use it for road center lines or others, it's fine. Every parcel in ArcMap used to own kind of its own lines, right? Where in ArcGIS Pro, in the new information model, the polygon, the boundary lines, the points are basically owned by the legal record that they came from. They are not owned by the parcel. So you can have even a new record, a legal record, that only creates control point. That's perfectly okay. There's no boundary being created. They're all owned by the legal record. In ArcMap, we had the function to check fabric that created a text file that was not very handy to get a big list of object IDs, where in Pro you can evaluate your data and use the error inspector, you get error features, you can see them, you can label them, you can zoom to them, you even have fixed methods associated with some of those errors. And some older concepts of unjoined, unclosed construction parcels, things that were foreign to GIS, let's say, and confusing, are deprecated. So make sure you don't have any of those you need to bring into the new generation. Improvements. So we made sure that the data is more defendable. Everything that you have in the system of record should be associated to the record that created it. On top of that, of course, there's always editor tracking to track an account for who created and who modified the data. This data itself uses simple feature classes, simple layers. You can easily extend any of those feature classes with your own attribution and publish whichever fields you see fit. Each parcel type has its own schema that makes the map simpler than it used to be, and you can create as many maps with whichever feature class makes sense for your purposes. There's no more hidden tables, there's no more hidden fields, so there's no more need to create special tools to see hidden things, which expose not only that, but also the properties of the fabric when we add another property. We use the new branch versioning with all the advantages that it provides, one of which is to be able to walk back in time to any moment and see exactly how the data was at that given time. So it's a bit like geodatabase archiving. You get it kind of for free, and that's very meaningful to see how the data was when using branch versioning. Another advantage is it doesn't require the compress and analyze. It kind of maintains itself, and it's performant, and it's of course using services and available on all clients, not just desktop. Quality management engines we talked about, and all the feature classes in a Parcel fabric are 3D enabled. So if you have 3D data, it can support it. Let's see the first demo, and we'll switch to myself, and we'll see a bit about the information model. So if you downloaded the sample data and unzipped it, open the project called Migrating and Administrating Parcels, you can go to your databases, and the first thing I reduce this data so it can be shipped is to show that it can work out of the box. So here we see a Parcel fabric, and it's that blue thing that sticks out. And if we right click on it and go to its properties, we can learn more things about it. So the data source tells me where it is, that's fine. And there's a Parcel fabric tab. It tells me that it's version 4, tells me which is the minimum release required, when it was modified, and some settings about the maximum parcels to build and validate. You can also see which parcel types are a part of this Parcel fabric. There are 3. One is called tax, conveyance division, and encumbrance, which basically means easements. And if you wanted to update the name of any type, you can just do it in here. That's fine. There's another column here called administrative boundaries. Those are meant for very large parcels. What we do here is that we omit the polygon of that parcel type from participating in the topology. We do that to prevent huge data areas that require us to validate the entire extent, which is a heavy operation. So we limit the validation only to the areas modified, and those are limited by a few lines that get updated. Another view to look at this data is which feature classes participate in the Parcel fabric, and here they are all listed, as you can see. And let's see what happens when you add a Parcel fabric to a new map. So I'm not going to add one feature class at a time. Instead, we are just going to add this Parcel fabric to a new map, and it will add the Parcel fabric controller layer, but it will also add all the parcel types as well, and it will create a meaningful map. So we wanted to have you start with a meaningful map, and if we zoom in here, I had to reduce this data so it can be downloaded to uploaded to GeoNet and be shared. Here you can see the data is meaningful, and you can go ahead and start editing it immediately if you wanted to. Another thing to notice, this is the Parcel fabric layer. We can expand it. You can see the record feature class is actually inside this Parcel fabric, and it has that blue outline. So if you zoom out, you will see the record table. If we press on the parcel and identify it, this is the records feature class. Here we see the parcels. You can navigate between the parcel to the record that created it, okay? So that's easy, and the relationship class is also defined as part of the Parcel fabric. Those arrow features that you see here in the dirty areas are coming from the geodatabase topology that is defined, as you can see here, as part of the Parcel fabric. If you wanted to, you can also see the topology properties. We don't constrain you from doing so, and if you wanted to add additional rules, you are welcome to do so or modify the existing ones. So that's another way to view the things. Let's make sure that I didn't forget to say anything. I think we are pretty good, so let's go back to the slides. and see where we are. So what is a parcel? We talked about that. A parcel, each parcel type has a polygon and a line boundary lines, and it's a separate feature class. And the parcel type should be something meaningful, right? Tax, subdivision, conveyance, encumbrance, whatever parcel types you see, and fits your business. If we talk about the cadastral context, it will be maybe rights, lease, ownership, restrictions, responsibilities. So parcel lines, you see that between two parcels, there's no need now to duplicate lines unnecessarily. So we want to be true to the legal record. However, if the legal record shows dimensions, as you see here, what we call the backlots problem, or between the right-of-way and the parcels, you can have overlapping lines. So here we can see that the right-of-way line is 335, and each lot has its own dimension. As well, here is the backlot issue. Overlapping lines are allowed. And administrative boundaries, we talked about them. You can use them as well. They have different default symbology. So points are kind of the glue between parcels. They could have coordinates or not. You could set certain points as fixed if you wanted to, by set their flag fixed to true. Further support will come with ArcGIS Pro 2.8, by the way, for that. And if you're using least square adjustment, there's additional properties on the points that serves that purpose. From the accuracy that is used to weighing, to coordinates that will be accounted for if they are there, just like any other measurements, as well as the constraint type. You can constrain them, flag using the constraint flag in this square adjustment. Connection lines, like you can see here, can also be modeled as you see fit. We show one type, but if you want it, you can have different types of so-called connection lines. Any line that doesn't create a new boundary. Those could be tie lines, they could be road center lines, and so on as you see fit. And of course, if you run this square adjustment, they will be taken into account and part of your server network. So they add connectivity to your network. Topology is part of the fabric, so the fabric controls the topology. It also comes with 2.7 attribute rules built in. So you'll find that there's a rule called must have a record on every feature classes that you can evaluate, for example, as well as additional rules that we ship and you can opt in and import to your parcel classes. If you evaluate or validate each one of those, you will see that you might get errors that you might need to fix. And we know many of you validate your edits after performing them before you submit them and push them to the default version, and to make sure that you don't have any topological errors, or you didn't forget to create names for your parcels, or you have the right name entered in, and so forth. So based on your business decision. And now we'll see how to create a new parcel fabric, add parcel type, and extend the information model. Okay, let's switch back to Pro. And here we are. We can close this map. And we can work with a second file geodatabase that says migrate from polygons. So here's sample data, polygons. Let's see how it looks. We can just right click on it and say add to a new map. And this is courtesy data from Harris County Appraisal District, just a few parcels, probably not current anymore, but they'll do the job. If we can see we got some default symbology here, and if we look at the attribute table, we can see that they have fields that are business specific to Harris County Appraisal District. There's also a field here called record name that groups a text field that groups parcels together based on the source document, the record they came from. Okay, let's create a new parcel fabric. The first thing we need to do is create a new feature data set. For that, we can right-click on the file geodatabase, say New Feature Dataset. This opens the geoprocessing tool to create a feature dataset, and we can give it a name, maybe Parcel Editing, or just Parcels. And we need to specify a special reference. I'm going to use the same special reference as the current map. And sure enough, we get State Plane, Texas South Central, special reference, and we are now creating an empty feature dataset, and here it is. To create a parcel fabric, we can right-click on the feature dataset, say New, and Parcel Fabric, and this opens the geoprocessing tool to create a new parcel fabric. Let's give it a meaningful name, like Parcel Fabric, and press Run. This now creates the controller dataset, the topology, the records feature class, the connection lines feature class, the points feature class, relationship classes. And we are done. And if we zoom, we can see the parcel fabric has been created. Now, these are text parcels, so let's add another parcel type and call it text. So right-click on the parcel fabric, manage, add parcel type, and we can call it text. It's not going to be used for administrative boundaries. It's not a large parcel, so that is good enough. And now we can press Run, and this now creates a polygon feature class and a line feature class, and associate them to the parcel fabric. It also creates relationship class to the records feature class, as well registering them as part of the geodatabase topology. So it's doing all of those things, and now we can see tags, text lines have been added. And if we have more parcel types, we can just continue and add as many parcel types as we need. Let's talk about extending this information model. Let's imagine that I wanted to track the status of the parcels, for example, and have a field called status on the parcels that I want to track. The way to do that is to add a domain. A domain is something you add to the geodatabase level, so you right-click on the geodatabase and go to domains, and you'll see that the parcel fabric already comes with a few predetermined domains for the adjustment constraints, for area units, accuracy, and so on. There's already a record type here, so that we'll use that when we create the design the records feature class, sorry, merge, split, and so on, and we'll add another one called parcel status, and we're going to make it a long integer. And we can specify the values. Let's say 1 is, let's say, approved. 2, maybe it's going to be draft. And 3, maybe requires some more research. Something requires more work. So research spelled right? I think so. Okay. So we added 3 values, and we can add them. And you can see that actually I have already parcel status domain in here. This is why it was flagged. So that's fine. We'll use one of those now for the exercise. Now that we have that, let's design the information model of the parcels. So remember, there's some extended attributes here on the source data. We can go design fields to see the schema, the fields of this feature class, and here they are. And we can do the same on the target feature class we want to append the data to. And again, we're going to go on the tax parcels feature class. It's a simple feature class, and go design fields. And there's nothing special about what I'm doing now. It's one-on-one for geodatabase design. What's nice in ArcGIS Pro, you can put them side by side. And now there's a neat part. Here they go, side by side. There's already a name field on source and target, so values from here, they're both text, will just transfer. But there's more extended fields, so I can just select the first one, press the Shift key down, and select those fields. I also want to take the record name field, so I'm going to press the Control key down and press this one. And now I can simply go copy this schema, come to this area on the target, right click, and say paste. As simple as that, and press save. That way I know all my attributes and my source data will just get transferred to my target. Later I might clean it up and get rid of some of those. If I wanted to add another field like status that we just created, we can put status field here, parcel status. So, and it's a long. I can give it an alias, and we can specify the domain here to be parcel status. We created this one, but I'm just going to use this one. And to commit those changes to the schema, we press save. If you see save disabled, it's usually because you have a map open with pending edit, so you need to discard or save them before to release the lock, and then you'll see the save getting enabled. So now we have source and target matching, and to migrate the data, all we need to do is basically just append the data from this to here. So how do we do that? It's simply using the append tool. So let's just search for append, and under data management, and we can open this tool. My input data set is this sample. Make sure there's nothing selected, otherwise it will only transfer the selected features. So I'm going to take this as my source data. I'm going to drag my target data, which is tax feature class, in here. The input fields must match targets. No, they have different schemas. One of them has many more fields. And we can see fields like name in black. That means it has the target. It's just going to go in. These are some fields that do not have a target. And all of those, of course, that we just added on both sides have a target. For example, if I had a field that says the legal area, I could just add a new source here to say the legal area goes to this field, and so forth. I'm going to leave it all empty now and press run. And this is basically data migration. We're just moving polygons from one side to the other. It's as simple as that. So it's creating that. We can see it in the map. We can now remove those two feature layers from the map and add the parcel fabric and see how it looks. You can add one parcel fabric per map. There's no need to have multiple parcel fabrics in the same map. And it's added the parcel type. You can see here it also had historic parcels, so they have different symbology. And here are all the parcels, and if we zoom in, we see the polygons. But what we don't see now, and they have the name field and the label, what we don't have is lines and points yet. So how do we create those? First thing we want to do is create parcel records. The parcel records is in the parcel layer. If we switch it on, we don't see any records right now. So the way to create records is with another geoprocessing tool. Under the parcel toolbox, I'm going to show you now where the parcel toolbox is. Under parcel tools, administration, you'll see the create parcel fabric and add parcel type tool. Another thing you'll see is create parcel records tool. Remember that record name field that I showed you on the data? It exists both on source and target now. We are going to use this tool to create our records. So because we have a field already ready, we can just specify the record name to be used to basically think about it as dissolving where each parcel came from. That's the record name. If you wanted to use an arcade expression, and let's say use the first characters in the parcel name or any combination of multiple fields, you can do that using an arcade expression as well. So, but because we have a field already ready, we're just going to use that and press run. And it's going to associate those parcels to those records and also update the record information. And now we can see the blue footprint of those records and their names. If we open the records table, we'll see the record names here. We also see how many parcels are associated with each record in the parcel count. If we press on the parcel type, we can see that we don't get the record type domain yet. So again, to design that, we can go to Design and go to Design Fields. And under record type, we can point it to the domain that we saw before called record type. Press Save. And it's now hooking up this field with that domain. And it will limit the type of entries we can do with that field. So now when we go and click here, we get the merge, split, resurvey, and so on. You can model that to meet your business needs. Now, the record name has to be a unique field. And if you have another business system that has those names, it could be a recorder's number, you can basically join the table and you can transfer potentially the record type information. You can transfer the legal recorded date and any other field that makes sense for your business. You can see that we have limited amount of fields on the records, and you are free to extend it to meet your business needs. So now that we have done that, we are ready for the last step, which is to build parcels. Using the Build Parcel Fabric tool, we can specify the parcel fabric and press Run. This will create lines and points. If you do have lines, and if you have data in the lines like cargo measurement that you want to keep, simply append your lines into the line feature class like we appended the polygons, and you should be good. And then run the build. That's another step, okay? So, but if you don't have lines and you don't have points, or if you do have lines and there's nothing worth keeping there, you can just use build and it will supplement the data with the additional lines and points. As you can see, there's no measurements of those lines, therefore there's no display label showing up for those. Another common thing to do sometimes is to set your units and so on. We'll talk about that a bit later. But basically, this parcel fabric is ready to go. I can quickly test it. If I create a new record, give it a name, I can see that the type, say we're going to do a merge, create. I can now go in my record-driven workflows, select a couple of parcels, merge them using the merge tool, give the new merge parcel maybe a name, press merge, and here we go. There's the footprint of this transaction in the records field. The new parcel has been created, as well as the two historic parcels that got retired. So everything is working. If we look at the attributes of parcel 1, 2, 3 we just created, you'll see that there is a relationship class that you can expand, and you'll get to the record that created this parcel, right? That we just created. And this record, it was retired by this record. If we look at the parcel, you'll see that it was created by this record. We can see the GUID here. It starts with FD8. If we now select the historic parcels underneath, let's select one of those historic parcels, you'll see that it's recorded that it was retired by the same parcel and created by an older record, of course, that is the record called Walden on Lake Houston. So everything is working. We're going to discard those edits. That was just a quick trial, and we're using sample data here. So let's discard that, and we are done basically with data migration. Okay, so we saw this demo. Here's some, again, walkthrough from Christine on what happened. There's a link actually in the help documentation that just walks you through those steps. There's a workflow, create your and load parcels, so you can welcome to do that. And here are the major steps that we did. We created a new feature data set. We created then a parcel fabric. We added as many parcel types as we needed. We extended the information model. We did field and domains, but it can go beyond that. You can also spend time here configuring your topology rules and your attribute rules. That's also part of your new schema. You can append the data in. You can use the field mapping control if They are different. You can clean up fields you don't use anymore, not carrying all the fields that you have for no reason. And after you append the data, you can create your parcel records and hit build to have a parcel defined with points and lines. And this was how you move in from data sources that are not parcel fabric for ArcMap. But what if you had an ArcMap parcel fabric? Well, then your job is much easier. And if you remember the pain involved in moving to the ArcMap parcel fabric, it required you to do a lot of cleanup data and then load. With the new approach is you move your data as is. You saw I didn't check the quality of the data, I just moved it in, and you can clean it up later. Now, if you have an ArcMap parcel fabric, you just have to run the upgrade tool, and then you can do cleanup if you needed to. So let's see how that happens. It's just an upgrade tool, it's a geoprocessing tool, and I'll walk you through the process. One thing that I didn't do and might be worth mentioning, those source parcels that we saw here, I'm going back to the data migration. We came from polygons. If you wanted to make sure you don't have densified curves on those, and if you wanted to clean them up, what we recommend, let's add them for a new map for a second, and I'll show you what you want to do. So let's say I had source polygons and source lines I'm starting from, like we had before, but some of those polygons are densified. Some of those curves, are densified. First, you might ask, how do I see that? So if you go to the Editing tab, there is a vertices tool there, so that's one way. I can just select a parcel by parcel and go to the Edit Vertices tool, which is in the gallery, and you'll see the vertices. And if you have identified curves, you'll see here many, many vertices. Let me exit that tool, and I'll show you another way to do that. So here's the Edit Vertices. We'll exit that. Okay. Another way is just to close the Modify tool to start the Create Features and press any of the construction tools here. So it doesn't matter which one. The only thing is you need to see is that you have a cursor that looks ready for editing, and then press the T key like Tango. Okay. So I'm gonna again click here. Oh, I'm not in focus. The map has to be in focus, of course. And you can see that the curves here are actually really, really nice. But if you identified, you'll see a lot of, when you press the T key, you'll see a lot of reminiscence of those densified curves. If you wanted to fix them, what you recommend doing when you only have the polygons is run the Simplify by Straight Line and Circular Arc. So again, I'm just going to search for simply, it's not simply to spell that, Simplify by Straight Lines and Circular Arc. So this is the tool, and it, from 2.6, I believe, takes both polygons and lines. So if you have lines and polygons, just put them both. In this case, we can just put this sample in. You can specify the maximal allowed offset. So if your data is good within 1 foot, let's say you can say 1 foot. Don't see foot here, but no worries. I know the conversions, and I'll just put 1.3 meters. It's good enough. Let's say you want to specify that the radius cannot be smaller than, I don't know, 5 meters. And we don't want to have those very shallow curves by mistake. So specify your maximal radius and then press run. In this case, it's only going to run on one parcel pretty quick. It's going to actually run on the entire data set also quick. So run this tool, get rid of your densified curves. You can run it multiple times with multiple tolerances. Select which data you want it to run on, so you don't run it maybe on natural boundaries. And it will do, it will clean your densified curve. So That's a tip. Now let's go back to the data migration. I'm going to close those maps here, and we're going to look at the catalog view at the sample number 3. We have here target file geodatabase. It's empty, nothing in it. That's where we want the new parcel fabric to go to. And we have an ArcMap parcel fabric. And as you can see, it has a different symbol. If I hover over it, it will tell me actually that it's a parcel fabric. You can see in the tooltip here, parcel fabric for ArcMap. It's a read-only, and we wanted to upgrade it to the new parcel fabric. There's a tool for that in the administration toolbox called Upgrade ArcMap Parcel Fabric, and it's very simple. Input parcel fabric for ArcMap. Here you go. Drag it on in. Let's drag it in again. Here we go. It's in. Where is my target feature data set? It's this empty feature data set. It's already in the same spatial reference as the source. They have to match. We check it. Do I want to give a name to my new parcel fabric? Sure. Let's call it parcel fabric and press run. And that's really all you have to do. Now, depending on the size of the data you have, it might take different time. What the tool does now, it is first discovering the parcel types you have them. They're all in the same parcel class. So it's looking at the type field, and it creates a parcel type for each of the discovered types you have. Then for each type, it will also extend the information model based on the extended attributes it has in the source. If it finds domains in the source, it will create them on the target as well. And it does many, many more great things that are all, by the way, documented in the doc to transfer the data properly. It doesn't take the unjoined, the construction, the blobs information that is not needed. And you basically can run it on 100,000 parcels. You can run it on 1 million parcels. It's just going to change if you are going to take a coffee break, a lunch break, or a night break. So based on the amount of data, just let it run. Let's go back to the slides. And we are already kicking off this demo. So I'm going to, while that tool is running, we are going to talk a bit what you can do after the migration. So after you upgrade your data, you'll see that you have a lot of duplicate lines, because in ArcMap every parcel has its own line. So between two parcels you'll find at least 2 lines overlapping, and you can remove those overlapping unneeded lines. And we'll see how that is done. The new tool that we just showed, the Simplify by Straight Line and Circular Arcs, can be used now in the parcel fabric as well to clean up densified curves. So you no longer have to do all this cleanup work before you move into the fabric. You can do it after the fact. And because, especially if you use the local government information model, you have now 56 fields on your parcel class. Of course, not all 56 are needed for each parcel type. Some pertain to tax, some to lots, some to encumbrances, some to PLSS first division, second division, and so forth. So what you'll need to do is delete the irrelevant fields from each parcel type. And because you might have extended your own fields beyond those 56, there is no way we can guess and tell which fields those are, and you'll have to do it yourself. The delete identical line, we'll see how that is done once the upgrade process is over. Let's switch to Pro and see the details. We can see that it's now saving the schema. We can move to the messages, and we can see that it created these domains and parcel types. And I'm now going to pause and let it run and continue this recording once it's done. Okay, the tool finished running. You can see that in my case it took 10 minutes and 36 seconds. There is a component that is fixed of creating the new schema, and that takes quite a while. And then there is the loading portion, and that is dependent on the amount of data you have. So the tool has completed. We can now look at the result. So this was my target file geodatabase. And we can see new parcel fabric in here. And we can simply right click and add it to a new map to look at the data and see some common post operation that we might want to apply to this data. So it's adding this data, and here we are. We can zoom in somewhere, and we can see that between every two lines, because it came from ArcMap, there's actually measurements now. And the second thing that we'll see that those measurements, there's duplicate lines here. So how do we get rid of those duplicate lines? And that's actually going to be quite, it can improve your performance, of course, because those lines many times are not needed. There's a tool called delete identical. So delete identical, here it is. And all you need to do is specify your source lines. So we'll go to text lines and specify which field we want to run it on the shape field. I recommend to just run it on the shape field. Some might add the distance field, for example, but then you will sometimes have lines that look like they have exactly the same dimension like you see here, but they'll have some 13 digits will be different, so they would be considered different. So I usually just run it on the shape field and get rid of all the identical lines. We are running it now on the entire data set. It's not going to take too long. If you have lines that resemble the backlot lines or road frontage, you'll see that they will not get deleted because, of course, they have different shape. And now we see that they have been deleted, and we are left with one dimension for each line. Another thing we might want to do, if you have densified curves, you might want to run the simplify by straight line and circular arc tool. You can now specify both lines and polygons together. If you have multiple parcel types, just run all the parcel types in the same time so they all get fitted with the same true curve. That's important. So another thing important in this context, let's look at it again. So I'll just show you how you would run it. Here's the tool, simplify by straight line. Again, input features would be now my polygons as well as my lines. Multiple types, keep adding. Maximal offset based on your accuracy, specify that like we did before. Maybe minimal is 10 and maximal is 1,000 or 10,000 based on your knowledge of the data you have in your jurisdiction. And I'm showing this again because of this last option here for anchor points. What you want to use is your parcel points as anchor points. And then you run that and you will get rid of your densified curves. You can specify a selection, and this tool, of course, will honor the selection in your data. We talked about getting rid of fields that are unnecessary, so let's open the design view for the fields on my tax parcels and see if there's any fields I want to get rid of. Okay, so there's fields that come with the parcel fabric. We can see this editor tracking and validation status, but these are fields that came from ArcMap that are no longer needed, and I can just get rid of them. So if I'm looking correctly, all those fields, PLSS fields, even some old editor tracking can be get rid of. So we just press the delete key here, and I think those are fields that came from the original data, the extended one, so I'm going to keep those. And you can see that there's also the original feature OID. You can keep this until you feel confident that you didn't forget something behind. If you are sure the data is good, you can get rid of that guy, as well as the original stated area. So that can help you if where the string, we couldn't figure out if it was acres or square foot US. In this case, we can just get rid of that one, and we can delete those fields now. So that's going to make your tables smaller, of course. And here we go. It deleted those. And now if we open the tax table, let's see some common operations, other common operations that you might want to do. You can see that we are smart enough to know that this was square foot US, and there are many fields, unit types in this domain. And if you wanted to apply it to, you didn't have it come across, what you can do is show the domain, uncheck this to see the actual domain value. It's 109,406, and then you can calculate it on the entire table, for example, to get the right units. You can also see that they are all associated to the right record, and all the external attributes came in. So that's great. If we look on the records table, let's see how that looks. So you can see we have those records. They got created. We can see the number of parcels with each one. We can even see that we have the default map plan came in, and there's actually 0 parcels associated with it. So that's good. And if you want to supplement it, of course, like we did with the migration, you can supplement that as well. I can also see here many fields that are no longer needed. So I would also recommend going to this field view, and if you don't use the surveyor, company, survey date, true mid bearing, get rid of that. Just delete those fields. Another important thing to do has to do with the map configuration, and I would recommend going to your project options and going to the units, and that's regardless if you're migrating or upgrading. Once you start to work on your map, make sure that you have the correct distance units. So don't be surprised if you work with foot US. That is, by the way, going to be deprecated. Make sure you switch to it. Otherwise, you'll see some differences like that look like rounding errors. If you use meters, switch to meters. Same goes for the area units. Make sure they are correct, because the area units are used when we merge parcels, for example, to calculate the merged area from the legal area. We sum them up and we put the right unit, so that uses this default unit area. So make sure this is correct. And the direction unit, do you use quadrant bearing or north azimuth? Specify that, and you will see that as your default. So these are some of the tweaks you can need to do after migration, as well as the cleanups. We talked about identical, about simplify, and about deleting fields that are not needed to clean up the data. So let's switch back to the slides and talk a bit about deployments. With the Parcel Fabric, we have 2 types of deployments. One is for the single user that uses a file geodatabase, like we use in this demo. A file geodatabase can handle a lot of data, but only one user can edit that data at a given time, because as soon as somebody starts an edit session, that file geodatabase locks and prevents other users from accessing and editing it in the same time. When you do that, you need ArcGIS Pro Standard or Advanced, and everything you see will just work, and it doesn't matter if you're using a merge or a least square adjustment. Everything is built within ArcGIS Pro. However, if you have a need for multi-user editing with versioning, then you need to go into the enterprise environment. And the enterprise deployment uses services that are consumed in ArcGIS Pro, but can also be consumed by web browsers and mobile devices. This gives you branch versioning and the ability to manage groups of users and privileges and access types to your data. The data on the service is live. You don't need to move it somewhere. You can create a map that displays your default version, and everybody can see the data in real time as it gets updated, for example. When you use the enterprise deployment, a lot of the functions you run in ArcGIS Pro, instead of running in ArcGIS Pro, are actually running on the server. So when you do a merge, for example, or a clip, instead of running it in Pro, it hits our Parcel Fabric REST API and it occurs on the server. The same would happen if you do a merge or a clip on a web browser. It will delegate it to the server. Every time a request like this is delegated to the server, it makes sure that you are allowed to do those operations, so you have to be a named user. To access the Parcel Fabric REST API and those capabilities, you'll need to have the user type extension for Parcel Fabrics enabled with your user. So once you have that enabled to the user, it doesn't matter if you log in from a web browser or from ArcGIS Pro, you have access to that REST API. Now, many of you complained that you got associated with those user type extensions in your ArcGIS Online organization instead of your ArcGIS Enterprise organizations. You can always call customer service and ask them to move those user type extensions from your ArcGIS Online to your on-premise organization. The key thing here is that for every ArcGIS Pro license that you have within your organization, standard or advanced, you're entitled to get one of those Parcel Fabric user type extensions. So you shouldn't see any additional cost for these partial capabilities if you have ArcGIS Desktop Standard Advanced. But of course, if you're now going to deploy 1,000 web browsers that do merge and splits, you'll need 1,000 Parcel Fabric user type extensions for those 1,000 web browsers that might be using it. So that's a bit about the deployment types we have. And of course, the enterprise deployment is the pattern of WebGIS, and there's many more advantages of using services over client-server connection, whether it's integration to business systems and access to real data and so forth. So here's a few steps you'll need to do when you are ready to publish your map into an enterprise environment, and we'll show those in a minute. But if you follow those steps, you should be good. You want to connect to your geodatabase. It will be now on an enterprise environment, so that means a SQL Server or Postgres, or it's going to be Oracle. And you want to make that connection registered as branch version. You want to register your data as versions, and only then add the data to a new map that knows the data is version, and further configure it for publishing as a web. But don't spend time here to worry about the editing. That comes later. And if you need to do any type of data massaging before you get ready to publish the data, we recommend that you use it as a file geodatabase for a staging environment. In a file geodatabase, you can remove fields, add fields, calculate fields, clean up data, whatever massaging needs to happen before you deploy this data for your entire organization. And a file geodatabase can handle millions of parcels. We tested it, and it works well, and you have that freedom to do so, and it's faster. Imagine that if you calculate a field in a version, then you have millions of features to reconcile and post to default. That's, of course, an unnecessary overhead as well. So now let's see how the enterprise deployment looks like. Okay, so here I am on an enterprise environment on another computer. You can see that I am logged in as someone that has privileges to publish. I'm connected to my portal. And what we want to do is take this staging geodatabase that is called Go Enterprise. There's a Meetup migration feature data set here. And we want to copy it to a new location on my enterprise geodatabase. So the first thing to do is add a connection to your geodatabase connection. So we'll create a new database connection. In this case, I'm using Postgres. This is the name of my machine, Galileo. I'm going to enter my password, and as indication that it's good, we can see that I can connect to my database, and I'm going to press OK. I am now connected, of course, as my administrator, and we can specify that we are connected to this server as a user called Amir. It's important that you connect as the data owner and not as the SDE user here. Now that we have the connection created, we want to right-click on that and go to my geodatabase connection properties and switch it from the old traditional versioning to the new branch versioning and press OK. So now this connection is branch versioning. Then in order to copy the data, I'm going to take my feature data set, here called Meetup Migration, right-click copy, come to the target, right-click paste. We have already done that, so if we scroll down, you'll see that I should have a Meetup Migration, and it has exactly the same data. Next step is to make sure this data is registered as version. I've already done that, but if you want to do that, you should go to Manage and press Registered as Version. If you see any pop-up message asking you to move things to base, know that you are on the wrong versioning type. Go back and make sure your connection type is the new branch one. If you did it right, you'll see it registering as version and some blue scroll bar go back and forth in here. So now it is in the enterprise database registered as version, and the next thing to do is to create a publication map. And we do that again by adding this parcel fabric to a new map. It knows that it's coming from an enterprise geodatabase. And because of that, you'll see that the parcel look a bit different here. They are geared a bit more towards a look and feel of a publication. We don't show, for example, the directions. And if you zoom out a bit, you'll see only the parcel numbers everywhere. So it looks a bit better. You'll also see that there's no historic parcels on the publication. It's everything. So if you need to tweak it a bit to look better on publication, you can. You can also do it later on the publication side directly against the service. Another thing that you'll see is that the topology is separated from the parcel fabric. The parcel fabric layer is showing only the records, and there's a standard topology layer in here. Few things to do before we publish is one, maybe you want to change this name, this map name, to your publication map. So this is for publication. So every time you want to publish, you're going to use this map called for publication. Another thing you want to do is go to your properties and switch this on, allow assignment of unique values to every layer, and this will allow you to add reorder layers, add layers, and so on to your publication map in the future without corrupting any maps that consume those services. Now, it's still missing my arrow feature classes that belong to attribute rules. Every workspace, every database have those validation object lines, object point, and polygon. And they should be registered, of course, as version, and you can add them to this map. And I'm going to add it to the current map before I go and publish it. And it doesn't really matter where they are and how they look, because when you add them as arrow feature classes later, they will look just fine. So zoom to your favorite spot. And now that you have, this will be where the map will look like. You can go to sharing and share it as a web layer. Press on this, and you want to give it a name that is meaningful. In this case, we can call it, I don't know, sample meetup editing map. So you can publish maps also for read-only, but we are now talking about making sure our users can use this map for editing. We can have put spaces here. We don't have to make it. And we can put some tags and so on. We're going to check that we want to, it's not an image, we want features to be included here. Okay. We can scroll down if we have groups in the portals. You can specify the groups you want to share this item with. Maybe only the group that is called parcel editors will have access to this map. So you can set now which groups you wanted to share it. For now, I'm just going to share it with myself. Another thing you can do is always go to your portal and share these items with additional groups. we'll switch to the Configuration tab. And if you have done everything correctly, you should see Version Management here, and you should see Validation available here. Check those two, and because we want our users to be able to create versions and to validate their data. Now that you've done that, I can see that I'm missing tag here, and this is why the Analyze is not enabled. We'll press Analyze and see if we get any errors. There's many warnings that warn us about symbology being downgraded, and some layer types that might not be supported on the web, and so forth. But we are really looking for errors. If this is the first time you do this analysis, you'll see an error saying that this geodatabase is not registered yet as a data store with the server. Just click those 3 points and register it with the server and analyze again, and this will make the server be aware of this data store. Because what we do now is we publish by reference, meaning that we don't copy all our data to the server. It's going to stay in this geodatabase, and we are just going to reference it. And once we pass the analysis, we can press the Publish button, which will publish it to my portal. Let's give it a minute. And there's many more settings here based on your workflows, by the way. Like if you wanted to be able to allow to take a map offline, you might want to enable sync. If you didn't want any, if you wanted to access this data from a web browser and be able to edit it, you might want to uncheck this one, because a web browser is not a true curve editor. So, or maybe you don't have true curves, so you don't care about that. So you can uncheck that as well. So there's many more settings you can control when you publish. Maybe you have clients that require other types of services. So it's creating a service definition, and when it's ready, it's uploading the service definition to the server. And now it's done it correctly and provides us with a link. If we press on this link, it will take us to our portal, and we can see the item. You can see I'm already logged in. I can see the item, and if we click here, we'll see the web map. So it's a real web map that can be shared as well with everybody, and it's pointing to the default version. But for now, it's here, we can see it. We can zoom, we can manipulate it, and we can also save it. So it's here somewhere, I think. You can also just do zoom to a certain layer, just so you can see how that looks. So let's zoom to layer, transparency. Oh, it's here somewhere. Let's see the records. Records. Let me zoom out. Here it is. We were zoomed in the wrong location, and you'll see the live web map that we have. So let's walk back to Pro and see how we would configure now a editing map. We can close this map, and the way to go is we're going to our portal, and now we should see the map we just published. There's the image layer, and here's the feature layer. We want the feature layer, and what we want to do is double click on the feature layer to get to the Parcel Fabric layer, and you can see it has the Parcel Fabric icon on it. And again, it's exactly the same process. We right click and we edit to a new map, and it's going to carry all the parcel types and give us the default symbology for parcel editing, just like we had in a file geodatabase, exactly the same data. And we also have the historic parcels, and now we see that we have one layer for Parcel Fabric with the records. If we switch to the data source, we'll see that we are pointing to the default version. If we click on the version, we see the versioning tab appear, which allows us to create a new version. We can call it Meetup Test or something like that. We can make it public and switch to this new version. So now we can edit in our version, so it works just like normal versioning. And if we can also move back in time, using historical moments and so forth. So that's everything on the versioning side. You want to probably symbolize the map properly. You can change the label settings. So for example, if you wanted only to see distances, you can directly go to the labeling and expand the text lines and say, you know what, I just want to see distance. Uncheck this one, and immediately you see the class that only shows distance. If you want to see both, but you don't want to see quadrant bearing, you can do that as well. Just go to your labeling, and there's a label setting there, so we can go to the label expression. And it's in Arcade, but don't worry, there's a setting here. Do you want to see quadrant bearing format, true or false? Well, if you want to see north azimuth, make it a false, press apply, and as you can see, it changed to show it in north azimuth. If you click on something and it doesn't look right, you might want to change the display expression for any type of feature. Polygons, lines, records, and so forth. You can just do that. And if you, on the editing side, let's close the labeling expression. If you see that you are missing some feature templates, you can add the feature template. So in the create features, that's one way to go about, is to manage the templates from here, and you can create new templates. Let's say you updated a layer, you want to update the feature templates there. If you use annotation, add those as well. Of course, before you publish, the new annotation in Pro also supports annotation editing. And I think there's a whole meetup just to walk you through what you can do in terms of moving your symbology, your feature templates, and all your assets from ArcMap to make it look and feel the same, with all the advantages of using ArcGIS Pro. So this was a bit about how you would go and set enterprise environment. Another indication that my error layers came in, by the way, is that I can right-click on a feature class and you'll see the add error layers available here. Those error layers are coming from attribute rules. Okay, so you can, and we don't constrain you in ArcGIS Pro. If you want to change the order, the name, the number of layers, you can just go and do that. So that's actually attribute rules errors. So if we call them something, let's make it right. So you can do that, and that's basically it. Let's switch back to the slide, see where we are, and try to wrap it up. Map configuration, we talked a bit about that. Use FileGDB for sample data first. Use it for staging before you go enterprise, because there's always some data cleanup processes you might want to apply. Things to configure, let's see if I didn't miss anything. Units, layouts. I didn't talk about layouts, but of course you might have multiple layouts, and ArcGIS Pro supports multiple layouts. No need to have one MXD for each layout. Things to do to the layer, symbology, scale dependency. I forgot to mention that, of course. You don't want all the parcels to be displayed when you zoom out. You might want to suppress it so to make it more performant. Labels as well. You don't want to draw all the labels when you zoom out. So all those little tweaks are applicable. It's just best practices of configuring your map, as well as the feature templates with Touchstone. And I think we showed some of those. And we can summarize this meetup. We took extra effort with ArcGIS Pro Parcel Fabric to make data migration easy. For those of you that use ArcMap, Parcel Fabric, we put a lot of effort creating an upgrade tool that makes your data migration and upgrade to the Parcel Fabric easy. So there's an upgrade tool that we showed and some post operations that you might want to do, but it's not the long process that requires you a lot of cleanup up before you move in. And we saw how Parcel Fabric works out of the box. All these data sample that you have now with this presentation, you can test it out and see for yourselves. Everything is configurable, no more hidden tables, hidden settings, and so on. Make it meet your business requirements. We didn't show how tasks can be used, but that's part of the administration that you can create and also promote best practices, is to take the tasks we ship with the software for parcels and make it your own and improve it using your business language and your additional steps if necessary. And with the new Parcel Fabric, of course, it has a built-in quality management, so that is defined through topology and attribute tools that you again can extend to make sure your parcels are maintained with the highest quality available. So I want to thank you for seeing this video, and here are some additional resources you might be interested in. This one is about a course that is available, and I think it's going to get updated as well to meet recent release. There's a lot of help documentation. This is where we'll put most of our effort to document the processes, including this data migration. There's this meetup, as you know, and these videos that we put on GeoNet, and subscribe to the GeoNet place, and you always keep in touch with the latest and greatest questions, ideas, and additional videos like this one. Thank you.